I had a one-on-one call with someone recently who was trying to get back into learning web development. They had gone as far as learning some HTML and CSS through some courses and tutorials, but they took a break and they were trying to get back into it. And they really felt like they needed to go and relearn the HTML and then get back into the CSS so that they could feel comfortable. And then I gave them my opinion where I think like you don't need to know that much HTML to really kind of move forward and start learning CSS and then eventually learn some JavaScript. The reason why I say that is because now looking back, I remember doing the same thing where I spent a lot of time trying to memorize every element and learn every attribute and really understand HTML, because when you're first learning the code and you're learning web development, you feel like HTML is really complicated, and it can be for someone who's new. But as you've done this for a while, you realize that HTML is probably going to be one of the simplest things that you learn when it comes to web development. It's really just a markup language. And when you start to feel like you need to learn every single bit of it before you move forward, you can kind of get stuck learning HTML for too long. And I think that the best way to learn is through building. And if you spend too much time focusing on relearning HTML or just spend too much time in HTML, you're not really going to get the most out of your time doing that. But the thing was, since we were on a one-on-one call, I couldn't really tell him what was it that he should learn before he moved forward. So that made me think, well, maybe I should do a video on that. So this video is for you, Malik, and for anyone else who is wondering how much HTML they need to know before they move on to learning CSS and then eventually learning JavaScript. And that's what I'm going to cover in this video. So to set up an HTML file and view it in your browser, it's actually really simple. You don't need to compile HTML. You don't really need to do much. Your browser will just read the file. And I'm going to go ahead and show you how you can do that now. So I gone ahead and just created a folder called HTML Basics example here, as you can see. And within that folder, I created a file called index.html. As long as you have the .html file type on there, your browser can read that. I'm going to go ahead and open that in the browser so you can see that. It's just going to be a blank page for now, but it's going to point to the directory that this file is in. So you can see there's a nice blank page here, and at the top you'll see where that path is to that file in my computer. So now that we got that out of the way, let me go ahead and start telling you about some of the basics of an HTML file structure. So the very first thing you need to do is you need to add the document type declaration at the top of your HTML file. This is how the browser knows what HTML version you're using. For the sake of this video, we're just going to stick to HTML5. And the way you declare the document type in HTML5 is by using the exclamation mark doc type HTML within opening and closing angle brackets. Call them pointy brackets, greater than, less than signs, or chevrons. But for the sake of this video, I'm just going to call them angle brackets because that's what I'm used to referring to them as. Now, this might be confusing, but this isn't actually an HTML tag. This is just for the browser to know what version of HTML you're using within this file. Older versions of HTML use more complex declarations, but we're not going to cover that in this video because you're more than likely not going to come across those, and HTML5 is the new standard, so that's just what we're going to cover. As you can see, this didn't do anything on the page itself, but if you open up the dev tools and look at the inspector, you can see up here we have the document type declaration that I put in that file. Make that a little bit bigger. So real quick, let me just briefly tell you what an HTML tag is and what an HTML element is. HTML tags are markup syntax used to define elements. They are enclosed in angle brackets. Most HTML tags come in pairs with an opening tag and a closing tag, but there are some self-closing HTML tags, which I'll talk about a little later. Examples of HTML tags that you may have already seen before are div tags, p tags, heading tags, and all of those are tags that do require a closing and opening tag. Some examples of HTML tags that don't require a opening and closing tag and are self-closing are the image tag and the input tags. There are others, but I'll just mention those, and those are the ones I'll cover in this video later on. And just remember that an HTML element is the complete structure between an opening tag and a closing tag, including the content within those. And many of the elements will have attributes that will be included in the opening tag. Sometimes I might accidentally use those interchangeably, and you might hear me refer to a tag as an element, but I just wanted to make sure that I told you what those were so that you know going into this video. So let's get into the first and most important tag, the HTML tag. The HTML tag is the root element of the file structure. It's where all the other elements are going to be nested. In the HTML tag itself, you're going to want to add the lang attribute, which lets the browser know what language this HTML file is going to be in, and we're going to do lang.en for English. This is good for accessibility and search engine optimization. The next tag that's very important in the HTML file itself is going to be the head tag. The head is where all the metadata of the file lives, like the title tag. The title tag is the text that will show up in your browser tab and in bookmarks. So we'll just call this my basic HTML example. So I'll save that, reload this page, and you can see here at the top on the tab, we have the new title that I just put in. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm going to try to keep it simple. I'm not going to get too deep into the meta tags because the meta tags might be a little bit more than what I'm trying to cover in just the basics that you will need, but know that meta tags are used for various things like search engine optimization, using keywords and different things that the browser can use to know like the different character types and different things that mostly the browser would be using, and metadata about your web page. But a couple tags that I will talk about in a little bit is the link tag that you use to link your CSS files to your HTML. And I'll talk about the script tag a little later as well, which is used to declare the scripts for your JavaScript that you could point to a local directory or even a CDN or a directory on the internet through a web page with the source attribute. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I just want to cover that real quick. Just for the sake of an example, I'll show you what a meta tag will look like. So there's a meta tag for character encoding, and here are some meta tags for descriptions and keywords that the browser will use to be able to optimize for search engines. Again, I'll come back to the link tag and the script tags in just a bit. The next tag that I want to talk about that is part of the main structure of your HTML file is going to be the body tag. I do want to quickly mention that anything in the head tag will not actually be visible on the page itself. So as you can see, I added all that. I refreshed the page and you can't see any of that. But if I open up the dev tools here, you can see all of the metadata that I added there and the title that was also added previously and the body tag that I just added. The body tag is the meat and potatoes of your HTML file. That is going to be everything that you can see that you put in there is going to be visible unless you specifically make it invisible or hidden with CSS or hidden attributes. Let's get into the body tag a little bit more. Now, I will talk about semantic HTML as well towards the end of the video, but for now I'm going to cover all of the basic elements that I think are really the fundamentals that you need to be able to build a web page, or at least the most common elements that you're probably going to be coming across, especially when you're first getting started. Let's start with headings. These are your H1s through H6, and they are your heading tags. And your browser will have default styles that will render these in different sizes. There is a hierarchy when it comes to headings, and a good rule of thumb is that you want your H1 to be your main heading, and then H2s go under that, and then you can nest headings underneath each other in order to break up your blocks of text and use your headings properly. There is a big debate on whether or not there should only be one H1 tag on a page, and you can really get in the weeds of that stuff, but I'm going to keep it simple and I'm just going to show you those elements now. Okay, I went ahead and fast forwarded that because no need to watch me type everything out. This gives you a good idea of what the H tags look like, or the heading tags. And I laid them out here. You got your H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, and then if I save that and show you what that looks like in the browser, you'll see that now we have all of our heading tags here, and you can see them rendered here within the body in the DevTools. The next tag that's going to be very common and one of the basic tags that you need to know before you move on to anything else outside of HTML is going to be your P tag, or your paragraph tag. So you can see that I added that paragraph tag, and that is right here on the page. This is how you declare a paragraph in your HTML. This is going to be very common. You're going to see a lot of P tags when you start working with HTML, and you're going to see plenty of heading tags as well. Now, whenever you use a paragraph tag, it's going to automatically wrap into another line. So if I just copy that and reload, you see that there is a paragraph on a new line. A very common tag that you're going to run across a lot is going to be the span tag. The span tag isn't necessarily a text tag. It's somewhat of a container tag, but it's often used within paragraph tags in order to not break and create new lines, because it is an inline element. And if I add a span tag, you'll see that if I add it outside of the paragraph, it's going to render outside of the paragraph. But if I add it in the paragraph within the opening and closing paragraph tags here, you'll see that this new, let me clean that up a little bit. You'll see that this span tag now, when I reload the page, is appended to the end of that paragraph that I added it to. So it will be in line. If you use it on its own, it will create a new line as well. A little confusing, but it's mostly used to style them differently. Common thing that you'll see is that you'll put like some CSS styles that are different from the paragraph on there to kind of make that look differently. So now we got our headings, our paragraph tags and our span tags covered. And that's going to be enough for the text portion of this. Again, there's a lot of other text tags that you could use and learn, and you can learn those as you go. You don't need to focus on those for the basics. Really, you don't need a lot of HTML to get moving and learning other things and start building. Next, I want to cover list, because you're going to come across a lot of lists when it comes to HTML. Lists are very common. There are two types of lists that you'll see the most, which are unordered list and ordered list. By default, with the browser styles, if you do an unordered list, you'll get some bullets. And if you use an ordered list, you'll get some numbers. So let's go ahead and add a couple of ordered list and unordered lists real quick. You will have list items within each list type. Those will be the same for either types of list. So unordered list and ordered lists will still both use the LI tags to declare the list elements in there, or the list item elements. I'm going to save this real quick. You can see here are my two lists. We have the unordered list here that has the bullet points by default, and then you have the ordered list that have the numbers by default. We can open those up in the dev tools and you can see the list items there. There are those there. Again, I say that they're styled like that by default because you could change the styles of the list identifiers or the bullets, or geez, I don't remember what they're called now. I'll have to save that for another video because I think that that gets into CSS, and decorating those list bullets and numbers aren't going to be part of this video. And that's definitely more CSS stuff, but just know by default, the browser will add numbers to the ordered list and will add bullet points to the unordered list. Now you could continue to nest more list items within a list. So you could create another list within the ordered list and have sub items or a sub list for that. So let me just show you that real quick. I'm just going to go ahead and copy this exact same ordered list here, and I'm going to go ahead and put it right under this list item here, and then reload the page. And as you can see now, this first list item, since I added another list there, it has sub bullets for those items that I added under item 1 with that new unordered list. And if I did it with the ordered list, you'll get numbers just the same, like this. All right. So that covers lists for the most part. I think that's all you need to know about lists to be able to move forward for now. Now this feels like it's getting a little messy, but I'm going to keep going just for the sake of showing you everything on the same page. And I don't know, if you guys want me to commit this to GitHub and make it public so you can see it after the video, maybe I'll do that. Let me know in the comments, or maybe I'll do it anyways. Just look for that and you can follow me on GitHub if you want to. Let's move on. The next thing that I'm going to cover is going to be the anchor tag. Now the anchor tag is how you add hyperlinks to your web page. Now you can wrap things in an anchor tag. You can use anchor tags inline, or you can make them their own element if you'd like. And basically you can write a paragraph tag and then highlight a certain item in that paragraph tag to make that a hyperlink, or you can use the anchor tag on its own to make the entire thing a hyperlink, or the entire text that you type out a hyperlink. You can also use the anchor tag for button elements and different things like that. I feel like that's getting a little bit more advanced because I really do want to make this as basic as possible, because I really do think that you don't need that much HTML to move forward and start learning other stuff like CSS and JavaScript. So anchor tag, it's just an A tag, nice and simple, but the A tag needs an attribute, and the attribute is the href attribute. The href attribute is what you're going to use to link to the website that you want to go to, or to link to another page within your application or within your files of your HTML. If you're doing a static website, you can directly link to another file. If you have an application and you're using a framework, you can still link to other files, but that can get a little confusing depending on the framework and how they do their routing. And that's just way too much to think about right now. So to keep this simple, I'm going to link out to Google because I don't have any other pages set up for this basic HTML example. So let's just say we're going to go to Google. So we do https://google.com. And then I'm going to write within the anchor tag, I'm going to say Google here. I'm going to save that, and we're going to reload this. And now we're going to see here, we have the anchor tag displaying on our web page. And at the bottom of my page, on the bottom left there, you can see it says the link that it's going to be going to, which is Google. And I'll click that real quick and open it in a new window, even though if I clicked it right now, I'm not using the target attribute, but you can target a new tab so that it opens in a new tab, or you can have it open in the same page so it doesn't open a new tab for the user. Again, that's extra stuff that you can just learn as you go. And there you have it. Google's opened up. I'll show you if I just clicked it, it will redirect this whole thing to Google, but I'll go back and there you have it. That's an anchor tag. And now I said that you could use an anchor tag inline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a paragraph tag here, and we're just going to say, let's go to, and then I'm going to copy and paste this, or I'm going to cut that there and paste that there. And then we're going to see it says, let's go to Google. And now we're going to open up the web page again. And you can see that we have our paragraph tag here, and we have the link to Google. It still works the same way. And I'll open that up in the DevTools so you can look at that real quick, and you can see that we have the paragraph tag, and within the paragraph tag, we have the anchor tag that goes out to Google there. So that is your anchor tag or your A tag. Another very common and one of the basic tags that you should know is going to be your image tag. And your image tag is IMG, and that is a self-closing tag. And there are elements in HTML that you don't need an opening and closing tag for. There are elements that you need opening and closing tags. I feel like I should have probably mentioned this a little bit earlier. I kind of missed that, but I want to mention that now. That a self-closing tag, like an image, you can just put the slash here. I don't really know if you need the slash anymore. That might be a thing of the past, but I still like to do it. I don't totally know if you need that slash anymore, but that's something that you can Google if you want to learn beyond that. And within the image tag, you need a source attribute. The source attribute is going to be where the image points to. Just like the href is the attribute where the link points to, the source attribute is where the image points to. And this could be an image on the internet, or it can be an image within your application. Since I'm going to keep this simple, I'm going to point to an image on the internet. I'm just going to throw a placeholder in here real quick so that you can see how that works. When I was getting started, I used to get the href and the source confused often. And I remember having trouble with that and kind of going through this now and just having flashbacks of forgetting about the two being different, and I would confuse them sometimes. And you can also wrap an image in an A tag and make an image a clickable link, and that's where it might get a little bit more confusing too. For the sake of this video, I'm going to keep those separated for now. I don't think it's a sometimes thing. I think that it's very good practice when it comes to accessibility to include the alt attribute. Now, the alt attribute is used for when an image doesn't load to have some descriptive text of what the image might be, but more importantly, it's used for accessibility and for screen readers and people who use assistive devices and can't see an image, so that they can have an experience and know what image they would see if they were able to see an image. So always include an alt tag in there. The alt tag should be human friendly. It should just read as a description of what the image is, and it doesn't need to be like underscored, or it doesn't need to be hyphened. It should just be like plain text, like this is an image of whatever the image is, or, you know, if it's your company logo, you can put the company name there or whatever, but it should be a descriptive text of what the image is. Now, for the image itself, I'm just going to find a placeholder image. So there's cool little tools like this, which is placehold.co, which is nice and easy. You can just come here, copy this link that they have here, and then just put it in your source there, which will then tell the browser to go look for that image here. And then if I save this and I go back to our example page and reload that, you'll see that that image is now displayed within our page. The browser is then pulling that image from that URL into your page. When you start building your own websites, you're probably going to be hosting your own images, and then we can get into image optimization and stuff like that. But if you were pointing to your own project, you can just kind of do a relative path of which directory your image is in. Again, for the sake of this video, I'm just going to hyperlink out, but just know that if it was in a directory within your project, you would just point to that image name and that directory. That covers a lot of what you're going to see and elements that you will see on a page. Now, there's some very important elements I'm going to talk about right now. And the first one I'm going to talk about is going to be the div tag. Now, us developers, even though I'll get into semantic HTML here in a second, us developers love putting stuff in a div. Like, we just love divs. And everything on a web page is a square. Think about it that way. And you basically separate all your content in different squares on a web page. So for the sake of explaining how the div works, I'm going to take the heading tags here and I'm going to put them in this div here. Then I'm going to create a new div here. And then we're going to take these paragraphs here. And since we're not styling these, you're probably not going to see much difference on the screen. Since we're not using any styles, all that did was move it down here, but I'll open up my DevTools and show you how everything's in a container now. So here you have all the individual elements, but you can see that the DevTools is highlighting this element here. And that element that it's highlighting is that new div. So all of these headings are wrapped within this div. And if you look here, we have the other div that I created with the paragraph tags, and those paragraphs are now within that div. So using divs is how you set up different containers for your elements on your web page. Divs can be nested in other divs, and it's really how you want to use to kind of structure out your elements on your page. And for the sake of this video, I'm going to keep it really simple because I kind of just want to give you a high level. I keep saying that. It just needs to be a high level because this is really all you need to learn in order to start using CSS and then to eventually learn JavaScript, because it really is this simple. And these are like the core elements that I think are the most important for you to pick up and then move on to start building with. All right, I have to move those divs back up now because it's going to drive me crazy that the headings and the paragraphs are down there now, because I feel like they need to be up here because that's where they were. My OCD won't let me leave them down there. But let's move on. So I quickly want to cover the form tag and then just a couple input tags, because I think they're important to cover. Even though you might not be working with forms right away when you're first getting started, you're going to run into forms all the time. Honestly, the internet is just a bunch of forms and divs, and you're going to have to get used to seeing form tags, and you're going to have to understand what the action attribute does and what inputs look like and what they are used for. But I don't want to get too deep into every input type because there's a ton of different types of inputs, and that will just take up way too much time for the sake of this video. But I think you should know what a form tag is and what that looks like and what some inputs look like. So you have your form tag here with the action. Form tags will almost always have an action and a method attribute associated to them. The action specifies where to send the form data to, and the method lets you know what type of HTTP request method it is. It could be a get method or a post method. And that's going to be very common when you're working with forms. You're going to see actions and methods. And I don't want to get in the weeds of that for the sake of this video, so I'm going to move on. And you can see that the form is not displaying on the screen yet because I don't have any elements in there yet. So there's nothing underneath this image, which is where the form should be. So to keep it simple, I'm just going to add a text input, but just know that there's a lot of different input types. You have inputs for emails, you have inputs for passwords, you have inputs for dates, and those are all native HTML elements that you can use, which lets the browser know what type of input data you're trying to take from the user and will help guide the user into adding the right kind of data. And it also helps with validation. So if you use like an email input and the user doesn't use like an @ with a valid like email format, then you can use that to help with your validation. Same thing with the telephone input, which is a TEL input type. But with inputs, you're always going to have a type attribute that's associated with them. And that's how you declare what type of input it is. So for the sake of this video, we're just going to do the text input type. And usually you should have a name associated to the input. The name is arbitrary and you can name it whatever you want, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to name this text input. But you can name that username, you can name that user last name, you can name that name or just last name. You can name it whatever you want. So the name is usually used for your server-side code. So when you submit a form, you can get those elements or the values from those elements by the name. It's also accessible with JavaScript. So it's a way for you to just know what data is being entered into which fields and for you to be able to grab that data once you submit the form. Just know that you can't target that with CSS. Any element in the body of your HTML can have an ID. A good rule of thumb is that you only want to use an ID once. You don't want to repeat IDs. That's kind of a no-no. You should stay away from repeating IDs because the ID is an identifier for that exact exact element. It's not just for forms, but for this form, since I'm using Emmet as a quick way to write out my HTML, it added an ID. So the ID could still be the same as this, right? Which is just text input. We can just name it the same, right? And again, these are arbitrary. You can name them whatever you'd like to name them. You use them as identifiers. The name itself is going to be for like your server-side code and your JavaScript, and the ID can be used with CSS where the name can't. But again, you usually want to have one ID per element. That's just good practice to follow in the future. I know when I was first getting started, I put multiples of the same IDs throughout my whole HTML because I didn't know what I was doing, but that's where classes come in. And I'll go ahead and add a class here just so that you can see what it looks like, and I'll talk a little bit about class real fast for you. Classes are used as CSS selectors so that you can style elements on your page. You can also target IDs with CSS to style them as well. There is a level of specificity when it comes to certain hierarchy with attributes such as ID and class, which is beyond the scope of this video, but that's more in the CSS world when you'll move on from this and get into that. And you'll know that when you target your CSS selectors to target certain elements, you have to be aware that some attributes will have more specificity than others. And if you target something by an ID, it's going to be higher up on the list than if you target something by a class name. So just keep that in mind. But classes are mostly used for styles, but you can also use them with JavaScript to target elements on the page as well. And they're going to be something that you're going to see a lot of. And you can add multiple classes for an element, and you can use this same class names all throughout your HTML page. If you start learning things like Tailwind, you'll know that they use a lot of class names to add styles to the elements on a page, and you're going to be using it a lot when you get into CSS. But for the sake of this, I'm going to show you that you can add 2 class names to this input. And since we don't have any CSS and I'm not going to cover that here, I'm just going to say that this is going to be like primary color, and then we'll add another class. Let's just say we had a CSS style called like large input. Again, this isn't going to do anything because there is no CSS file here with those styles, but for the sake of just showing you how you can use a class, because it is a very important attribute to cover, and we're kind of getting into IDs and whatnot with this form input, I'm just going to put that there. And now I'm going to go ahead and just save that. Again, the input is a self-closing tag. As you can see, I don't need a closing input tag here. Just like the image tag, it can self-close, so you don't have to have a closing input tag for the input. And then I'm just going to add an input type of button. So we're going to do input button, and then we're going to have that button there. And with the button input type, you add the type button, and that's how it knows that it's going to be a button. And then you give it a value, and the value is the text that the button will display. Again, I'm going to keep this really simple. I'm not going to link the button to the form. And usually when you do a button that is going to submit a form, you want to do the type of submit, which will then submit the form that it is nested within. HTML is just smart enough to know that this button, if it's nested inside of that form, will submit the form. It's not all linked up, and you would need the actions set up and all that, but just so that you know, you can use the input type of submit within a form, or you can use the button outside of a form. Let me put it up here so that it won't be as confusing, since it'll be right there. And then we'll just make this a button. And then you can see when I reload the page, since I don't have any CSS, that kind of looks like trash. So let me see if I put it up here instead, reload that. Okay, so you can see this button is up here, and that one's just button. And then that one down here is send. And I will just show you what that looks like in the dev tools. You have your form. There's no action or method values in the attributes for the action and method. You got your input type here, and you could type into that input type there. And then you have your input type submit here, which will send there. And then it just shot me back to the top of the page, because you can see here, since that's part of the form, it adds the parameter to the URL as if it was trying to send a request from that form. Here's the name of the input that I had there, And that's the value that I typed into that. And then it puts it in the URL to send that off to the request. And that's kind of common when you do some form requests, and if you're sending them to other places, it receives this URL and then kind of takes the names that it needs to know what the values are for that. If you're sending it to your server, it won't always necessarily have this in the parameters, but since I'm just using the default form input there, it did put this at the end of my URL here when I submitted that form input, and you can see that up there. So that's just kind of a good to know, but still feels like it's getting a little bit more advanced, and I don't want to get too far off the rails here. So let me reel it back in because I think we're almost done. So I briefly talked about the class attribute and the ID attribute. I think that for the sake of this video, I'm not going to get into too much more detail on those attributes because I feel like I covered them at a high level enough for you to be able to move on from HTML. Because like I said, you really don't need a lot of HTML to start making stuff happen on a web page. Now, it looks horrible because there's no CSS, but again, I'm not trying to cover CSS in this video, so I'm not even going to open up that can of worms. But I do want to quickly talk about the link and the script tags, but first I am going to talk about semantic HTML super briefly because while it is best practice to use it, the truth is that most of us developers just throw everything in a div tag like a bunch of degenerates. And many of us don't really follow semantic HTML, but I want to give a quick high level of that. And I'm just going to kind of show you what that looks like real quick. I'm going to clean this up and just show you that fast forward magic stuff right now. All right, so I've cleaned this up. Or maybe ChatGPT did it for me. I wanted to just show you what this looks like if I were to set this up with semantic HTML. Now you can see we have tags here like the header tag, which declares the header section of the page. Then we have the main tag, which is the main content area. So the browser will know that this is going to be your main section of your page. Then we have the section tags, which break up the sections. You can also use article, but section is a little bit more common to see out in the wild. And then you can also have other tags that aren't here. For instance, we have the footer that's down here, but if we had a navigation, which is one of the ones that you'll probably see the most of, you could add up here the nav tag, and then you can have your nav elements there. If you wanted, you can do like an unordered list. Then you can do some line items with an anchor tag. So if you just did that, I'll just do it just so that we could show it real quick. So then we do line items and then we do anchor tag and then, let's just say page 1 and then we'll do page 2 and then we'll do page 3 and then we'll just add some hashes here. And then I'm going to go ahead and show you all of this beautifulness here. Again, there's no CSS here, so it looks like trash, but here's your nav up here. Let's see it in the dev tools. So you can see your nav items up here. I'm going to just highlight that. You have your nav element here, and then that's the unordered list that I created for the nav elements there. And now you have your semantic sections here with the header, which declares the header of the page where all the heading tags are now. And then you have your main content here that is now a new container that is wrapping our sections. And then our sections have the different paragraphs in them. If you want to use semantic HTML, which you should, but like I said, most devs don't. And that's just being real with you. You're going to see a lot more divs out in the wild than you're going to see sections. Shame on us for not following modern HTML5 best practices, but that's just how it is. You're going to see a lot more divs than sections and header tags and footer tags. Actually, footer and nav is pretty common, but I will say that not many people use section as much as we should. But that's semantic HTML at a high level. There's a lot more semantic HTML elements that you can learn about, but I would just cover those for now because I honestly think that those are probably enough for someone who's just getting started and trying to really just, get up and running and start building. Before we finish, I want to quickly talk about the link tag and I want to talk about the script tag. Okay. So the link tag, as you can see, VS Code is kind of giving me some helpers here. Maybe I should have been reading those earlier. This here is used to link to CSS. more often than not. It can be used for other things, but you're more than likely going to be seeing link pointing to CSS a lot of the time. And this relationship is saying that it's a style sheet. And then the href is just like the other hrefs that you see here. They can point to outside files or they can point to files within your project. For the sake of this video, I'm going to see if I can just quickly point to the Tailwind CDN and see if we can just get Tailwind in here super quick, because I think we should be able to. I thought I could use Tailwind, but I forgot that I got to point to Tailwind via the script tag. So we're going to use Bootstrap. I know, yuck. Who uses Bootstrap anymore? But I'm going to take this from the Bootstrap website. We're going to go ahead and comment out this, and I'll talk about comments at the very end because I obviously forgot them. Sorry, it's getting late. And yeah, you should know how to comment. How did I forget the comments? I didn't have that in my notes. I'm terrible. Sorry. When you get so used to doing this stuff, you kind of forget some of the basic stuff. So you can see this is just a regular link tag with nothing in it. I'm going to replace that with the Bootstrap link tag here. And I just want to show you what that's doing. Again, the relationship is a style sheet, but here you can see in the href, it is pointing to the minified Bootstrap CSS. If I open this file in a browser, you're going to see it's just a bunch of CSS, right? It's just jam-packed in there. So you don't need to worry about what this is doing. Just know that these are the styles that this is referencing and is now being pulled into your page. I do feel that this might be getting a little bit more advanced, but I want to show you what these tags do because I think that they're very important, but I wanted to cover them at the end because I think that covering this sooner would have been a little bit more confusing because I wanted to talk about the elements. Getting sidetracked. Sorry. Let's continue. So now we can go back to our page here, reload this, and you can see, did I save that? Nope, I need to save it. Now reload this, and now we have Bootstrap styles. You can see it looks a little bit better. It doesn't look as atrocious as it once did. There's nicer font here on the H tags and whatnot. And you can see that the list looks a little bit nicer, and the list actually has the heading and like all of this looks a lot nicer because I'm importing Bootstrap through that link tag. So you can pull in CDNs that have the CSS files that you want to use to style your web page directly through here. Again, if you were using something that was in your own project, you would just kind of point to that and say you had a styles.css file that was living here in your same project. Then that would point to that CSS and it would import those styles into this HTML page that you have here. Now, that's not there. I'm going to comment that out. So the comments, as you can see, you write them with the less than, greater than, bang, hyphen, hyphen, and you put those on each side. At the end, you don't need the bang or the exclamation mark. Honestly, I just like to do command / or if you're on Windows, control /. That's a shortcut on your text editor. That's a very common shortcut. That's pretty much how you comment on every text editor I've ever used. And that's just what I do. I don't think I've ever typed out this since I've started using that shortcut years ago when I first started learning how to code. And you should definitely be using shortcuts, which is something maybe I should cover in another video, but I don't want to get sidetracked again. So the last thing I want to mention is the script tag. It works the same way as the href in the styles here for the link. In this case, we don't use the href. Again, this is what used to confuse me when I was getting started because you feel like these are interchangeable, but they're actually not. So in a script tag, you use the source and you use the source attribute to point to where you want it to point to. Now, let's say you had JS file in here. Let's just say it was called main.js, right? And then this was in your project and it lived right on the root of this folder that you had your project in, and it was a sibling of your HTML. And then this would point to that, and then it would import all the scripts from that JavaScript file. Here, we are importing Tailwind CSS. Since Tailwind is imported as a script, then you can see I'm going to change these styles. Since Tailwind doesn't really have any default styling for any of these, you're not going to really see that. But like if I go to, let's say, this heading tag and I add a class of, let's just say, text XL, and that wasn't enough. Let's do like 2XL. There, you can see this tag is now larger than the rest of them. So, and the font changes, and you can see that Tailwind is in here now. I'm not going to add a bunch of Tailwind classes here, but now that CSS is coming in from this CDN. If I wanted to make this one even bigger and said, let's make it 4XL, and then I reload that, you can see that H2 tag is now bigger than the H1 tag because it's pulling in Tailwind CSS. So I just realized that using Tailwind as my example in the script tag might be a little bit confusing to anyone, because you're probably thinking, well, if script tags are for JavaScript, why are you referencing Tailwind CSS in a JavaScript script tag? And the reason is because Tailwind actually uses JavaScript under the hood. I don't want to get into too much of the details on why it does that, but just know that it is actually referencing a JavaScript file on the Tailwind CDN. And that's why I use Tailwind CSS as the example in that script tag. And I just wanted to clear that up. Something I just realized while I was editing the video about the script tag that I forgot to mention is that you can also put script tags at the end of your body before the closing body tag. This is often done in order to let all the elements on your HTML page load before you load the JavaScript, because you might have some JavaScript that needs to be able to target an element on the page. And if you load that script first, it might cause an error where it can't find the element that it's looking for. So it's pretty common to put script tags right before your closing body tag. So I just wanted to mention that. And then you would just do that right down here before the closing body tag. You would just write whatever script you're trying to link to right there, and you'll be good to go. Damn it, I just forgot one more thing about the script tag that I should have mentioned as well. So this is the tag that will never die. The script tag, you can also just write your JavaScript within the opening and closing script tag. So in this example right here that I'm going to add to the HTML file, at the bottom of the page, you can see that I wrote the script tag, and then I have a console log there that shows the welcome to the HTML basics tutorial. And now if I just have that saved and go to the page itself, and I open up the DevTools and go to the console, you can see that console log right here. Again, I'm not going to get into JavaScript, but I just wanted to show you that that script can be executed, and you can write JavaScript right in your HTML file within the script tag. And I can't believe that I forgot to mention that right from the jump, but that is kind of critical and really important that you know that, because you don't have to reference a file. You can just write the JavaScript in your HTML, and that script tag will wrap it, and it will know to execute that JavaScript. Also, something else that I realized that I forgot to mention earlier, because I did cover the link tag, but I didn't cover the style tag, and the style tag is very important. Forgot it because I wasn't doing CSS in this video, but I feel like this is also a critical point that I should mention, and a very important tag that you can use, and it's called the style tag. And in the style tag, you can directly write CSS within your HTML file. So just something that you should know, and I'm going to add that to the final HTML file that I will commit to GitHub, and it'll be here for you guys to reference if you want to go and clone the repo or check out the final code after I clean everything up. Also, an important attribute that I forgot to mention was the style attribute. The style is used to write inline CSS on your HTML tag, and you can use that on pretty much any HTML tag. Just want to kind of show you that real quick here. So here you can see this H1 has the style tag with color red and font size 40 pixels. And then I also have a CSS class that is using Tailwind styles here. Now, I mentioned specificity about CSS and how there are certain rules around the hierarchy and what will take precedence and what gives a higher level of specificity when it comes to targeting elements on your page and styling them with CSS. And when you use inline styles, that will override class styles. So here you can see I have that inline style of red and font size 40. And you can see on the page itself, I have the heading here with that red color and that font size, and that style attribute is overriding those Tailwind styles. If I remove that and save and reload this page, you can see the Tailwind styles are applied to that H1 tag. So just an important attribute that I want to mention before I finish this video. Also, a few more things on comments. The reason to use comments is normally you can use comments to kind of add notes, like here in the header section. As you can see, we have comments that are just calling out what these sections and divs and containers are. And you can also use comments to just comment out complete blocks of code like this. So you can see when I comment out these headings here underneath the H1 and H2, and I go back to the page, you have the H1 and H2 here, but there's no heading underneath them. And then if I uncomment that and save that and reload, then you can see that those tags are back. A use case for commenting out blocks of code is usually when you're kind of debugging stuff, or you want to see what happens when something's not there for whatever reason. Maybe you want to see what the HTML looks like without those elements on the page for just testing out your layout, or if you're using CSS or JavaScript, you can comment that stuff out too. Again, I won't get into that for this video, but for HTML, you just do it so that it won't render on the page, or to comment sections of your code with notes, or like how I commented out the script tag earlier, you can do that and it won't load that script. So basically, commenting out any code will just cause it not to render or run at all. As a general rule of thumb for good practice, you don't necessarily want to save and commit large blocks of commented code. That usually leads to code smell, and it's not really something you want to do in a production code base, because then you get a lot of ghost code that's just sitting around commented out and nobody knows what it does after a while. So just something that I'd throw in there, but I did want to talk a little bit more about comments because I feel bad that I forgot to mention them earlier. And that's pretty much it. I felt like I covered a lot of the other basics and pretty much everything I think that you really kind of need to know of the basics of HTML in order to like start learning CSS, and in order to start moving forward in your progress in learning how to code. Again, this video was pretty much for Malik and anyone else that might be feeling like they need to learn a bunch of HTML if they're just getting started. I don't think you need a lot of HTML when you're first starting out. It really is something that you should just learn a little bit of and move on, because it starts getting more complicated when you start learning CSS, and it starts getting more complicated when you start learning JavaScript. And HTML, at the end of the day, it is very simple. There's no logic in HTML, and it's something that you shouldn't spend too much time wrapping your head around, because it will come when it comes, and it's something that you can easily reference online by going to the Mozilla docs, or going to the Web3 schools, or going to any other website that will tell you exactly what you should be using. For the most part, this is really enough to start building your web pages, at least your first couple web pages. Of course, when you start getting deeper and deeper into web development, you might need to learn different types of elements and different types of attributes, and you might need to get a better understanding of how the specificity works with the CSS selectors and how to target elements with JavaScript. It will get a bit more complex as you learn more, but it doesn't need to be complex and overcomplicated when you're first getting started. I think HTML should be the thing you learn the least of when you're just getting started, and you'll pick up a lot more of it along the way and when you need to start using it. Again, you can get in the weeds of accessibility. You can get in the weeds of really trying to just learn too much of this stuff from the jump. I always say build more and learn less, and the more you build, the more you will learn. And a great place to continue learning about this stuff and to pick up from where we left off here is to go over to Free Code Camp and start doing their responsive web design section. They'll probably cover a lot of what I just talked about here, and they'll go into more detail on accessibility, and they'll lead you into learning CSS. And maybe I'll do one of these for CSS. And I don't know, I just thought about this video because I just remember that talk that I had with Malik a few days ago, and I wanted to put a video out there because I'm trying to do more coding stuff. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Let me know what else you might want me to cover. I want to start getting back into, you know, coding on this channel and talking about code and helping people out there who want to learn how to code and need a little bit of guidance. All right, with all that said, I hope this video was helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.